welcome back once again, the Fan2Fan Podcast. Here I am, Doug, your host and driver of the RV, because we are continuing our road trip of horror. And of course, alongside me, sitting shotgun, is Bernie Gonzalez. And then in the back, we've got Pete Charbonneau and our great guest host for this horror road trip, Andrew Murray. We left off with the crazies we were in Iowa, and we're heading to Missouri. So I've got to say it. Bernie, you're next. See what I did there?
That was good.
That's the movie.
Best transition ever. I saw the movie once. I don't know that I have much to say to this. So if you're listening to the episode, you're really here to listen to probably Andrew's commentary, because he is our card-carrying, certified by a nationally renowned, observed organization in horror. His lineage, his well runs deep. I saw You're Next. I think it's interesting because if you listen to previous episodes, we've talked about the idea of the final girl. And in Halloween, when we were driving through Illinois, we did talk about Jamie Lee Curtis and whether it's debatable if she is the first final girl. But there's something about You're Next that, for a bunch of Gen Xers, there's something about You're Next that to me feels like a very, it's like a millennial. I don't want to use the word because it can be used in almost like a derogatory way. It's a very aware and meta film, because like the reboots in Halloween that we talked about when we were going through Illinois, where Jamie Lee Curtis's character, they catch up with her having gone through all of this understandable trauma and PTSD, having survived, the attempted killing by Michael Myers in the original film, and what that would do to someone. So her inability to maintain relationships, her paranoia, her anxiety, all of that comes in with Jamie Lee Curtis. There's something interesting about You're Next, because there's like the opposite of that. There's a reclaiming of the victim where you're not going to be allowed to be the victim. And the main character, the actress, and again, having seen it once, that's what stuck with me, is that idea that she's where you would think she is the prey, she becomes the predator. She starts going after the people that you would think would kill her and tries to get some comeuppance. And there's something very meta, but also something very modern about that when you compare it to the movies that Doug, Pete, that we grew up on watching, where all those tropes were in place. This puts it a little bit on its head. So Andrew, I know you've probably seen this and have more commentary on it, smarter commentary than I definitely do.
Well, as our resident millennial, Andrew, you're representing your generation now. So is Bernie right? Is this a very millennial meta? I mean, you look at the cast, there's not one name on the cast that I recognize. So does this fit within that generation?
I would say so. Like millennial, it is kind of a generational shift away from, definitely the protagonists, the leads, the victims that we see inside horror movies through the 80s and 90s, where, there's kind of that meta approach where Bernie was talking. There's the self-awareness that, these characters, they're not, there's that trope in horror movies where you're yelling at the character to not do the obvious dumb thing that they're about to do. And then You're Next, I think, is one of the first ones that I remember it being a shift of, this victim, one of the main victims inside the movie, she actually has awareness and skills that she can leverage in order to turn the tides against the villains. You start seeing this in like Ready or Not, The Hunt, Cabin in the Woods was another one. And you start seeing this kind of, Cabin in the Woods was a little bit meta because they were, and I guess Scream's kind of meta too in that way, where they're picking apart the idea of horror movies inside of a horror movie. But definitely, giving power back to Don't Breathe was another good one that had this. But you're giving power back to someone that would typically be just the perpetual villain, always running, always trying to flee, trying to get to somewhere safe, trying to rely on other characters in order to provide power against the villain, and really just kind of reestablishing that power dynamic, that balance, so that both the killer or killers and the victim are on the same level. And it's more of a game of wits. It's kind of harkening back to like the Most Dangerous Game, where the villain is expecting such an easy pathway towards success, and so they're not ready for, I guess, the barriers that this victim is going to put in place. And so to spin that as kind of millennial reimagining, I think is just kind of growing of the audience's wanting to see a little bit more reflected of them inside of these protagonists, in order to kind of make the movie a little bit more different and a little stand out a little bit more. And I saw this in theaters and I rewatched it a handful of times, and for not really having any named casts, or really I think like anyone truly stands out one over another, it carries itself really well, and it's definitely worth watching and rewatching every now and then.
And I would say, like, we've talked about like A Spit on Your Grave, and Andrew, in the previous episode, you mentioned Hard Candy, where those movies end up becoming, I think you said it best, like vengeance plays, where these final girls get their justice and they deliver it most of the time, very brutally to the people that assaulted them, that attacked them, but it's always done after the fact. And I think that's why, if I call it like more of like a millennial modern day slasher, it's because it happens in real time. So like you mentioned, Andrew, when we're yelling at the audience, as the audience is yelling at the theater, and don't do that. In this movie, the main girl doesn't do that. She does the things that we as the audience are coaching her to be like, yeah, no, but she's aware enough to say, no, this is the part where I would shoot the person, because if not, they get up later and they kill me. I've seen the movies. I know that I'm not going to let this happen. So there's something really interesting about that idea, and the movies that you mentioned, Andrew, that have kind of taken that idea of that awareness, the meta piece, that the audience is like, oh, this is what I expect to happen because this is what the movies have trained me to happen. Something really interesting about Your Next in that wave of movies that are probably made by people like us that have grown up on this genre and just want to see it turned on its head a little bit and provide some surprise, and at the same time give the final girl the power, but not after the fact. Like, she's not going to be assaulted, she's not going to be taken advantage of, she's going to take advantage of the situation.
Yeah, and you think about, you mentioned the person that made it, Adam Wingard is the director, and he's got a little bit of a horror lineage where he did things like Pop Skull, A Horrible Way to Die, Autoerotica, and then he did Your Next, he did the ABCs of Death, but then most recently he was the director of Godzilla versus Kong. So he kind of lived in that horror world when he first started, but yeah, kind of being our age, that was probably, he looked at it and said, absolutely, we don't need to have those tropes that they had back in the day where people, like you guys said, are yelling at the screen. Let's make our characters smarter. Let's make them more self-aware. Pete, what are your thoughts on Your Next?
Not too much that hasn't already been covered. Like Bernie, I saw this once. I did see it in the theater, and I thought that there was some effective, use of tension going on there. A good mix, as was talked about. You've got your faceless would-be killers that you can kind of project certain things onto as an audience, but then you don't really find out too much about the background. So it's like there's that like empty vessel aspect to it that I think harkens back to some good older horror. And I love, Andrew, that you mentioned Your Next, because that's one of my favorite films to come out in the last couple of years. I thought that was just fantastic, and just what shows what can be done, kind of taking that revenge factor, like someone that you're kind of waiting for them to be the audience surrogate of, like, well, if I was in this situation, I'd do all these things to take out my my revenge on all these awful people. But yeah, I find it interesting, just that mix of old school and then the new school, like you said, Doug, with Adam Wingard kind of being of our age, taking the lessons learned from because it's those of us that have seen a lot of horror movies, certainly through the 80s, they got very stale very quickly, because once those tropes were established, they were just kind of beaten into the ground. So like every movie was like the same thing, and you're like, okay, you know what's going to happen. These people are going to act not very intelligently, but that was the patent to keep the film moving along because, but a lot of these things were just silly, on their surface. So I like the idea of kind of taking those lessons learned and then just showing something different of like, okay, well, we can't go back to that period of time, after Halloween, after the original Friday the 13th, Nightmare on Elm Street. They all, a lot of those movies became very, very derivative and repetitive. And I think just having, something new to say and just have, just to present that in a different way. I don't know what I'm trying to say. I'm just.
What you're saying, I think what you're saying is that you're waiting anxiously for your next in space.
I mean, that's the next logical step, right?
Well, why don't we? So when we think about next, why don't we get out of Missouri and keep going into the deep South now, where we're heading to Arkansas, and we're taking this one back a little bit. We're going to the Town That Dreaded Sundown, a 1976 film. Again, my first question I'm going to ask though, and Pete, you're nodding, so I'm going to start with you. Does this qualify? Is this a horror film?
Yeah, I would say so. It's there was a remake of this one as well. It might have been direct to video. I came across it, and I think I watched the remake before the original. Although I think I had seen parts of the original at some point along the way. But because it's got, again, another one that it may have kind of a cult following because it's kind of an early slasher, but there's still, it's a much different pace than what you're expecting from, when you think of a slasher movie. You've got your killer with, kind of bag over the head before Friday the 13th Part 2 Jason Baghead. So it's kind of like the OG, which I think is, it's an interesting look and certainly an unnerving one. But other than that, I'm trying to remember. I don't have the sharpest memory of like the rest of the movie. I thought it was interesting. If I'm not mistaken, it was almost done like documentary style because it was kind of like based on a true story type thing.
Well, it was filmed in 76, but it was shot in black and white. So yeah, maybe I don't know. It was centered in 1946.
The movie that I remember was in color, Doug, and the reason this is where the Mystery Science Theater connection comes in. And Pete, you kind of set me up here. This was perfect. So the documentary style, because the director had made Legend of Foggy Creek, which is considered, arguably the first found footage film where he was playing with the idea of the Sasquatch and taking, accounts of the Sasquatch from that area, but dramatizing it. So a little bit of, I don't know when Unsolved Mysteries came out, but, when you think about that, and
that's right.
What inevitably like Blair Witch kind of blew up, Legend of Foggy Creek is that. And I remember that from, I think it was the first one and maybe the sequel that are riffed in Mystery Science Theater. But at least for the Town That Dreaded Sundown, and we talked about this in previously when we talked about Indiana. Andrew, you mentioned Ed Gein, because this is where, and a better version of this is go watch the series Mindhunters on Netflix. So this will give you everything you need to know, where you have, Mason and Gein and a lot of those serial killers of that era. And then the Town That Dreaded Sundown comes out, and the guy in the hood is just a phantom. I think that's just his name in the movie. But the idea is that he's meant to represent anyone in the town. And there are times in the movie where you see the guy who we know to be the killer because they identify him by showing his boots. So that there's a guy playing a piano in a country club, and we see his boots. So we assume that this seemingly affluent person is the one that's conducting the murders, that's going around and killing them. So that's what I remember in the movie watching it. I think the reason why it didn't connect with me is because the killer, it uses a gun, and there's something that feels a little bit disconnected from the horror genre, because we think of something a bit more, a little bit more intimate. And the fact that this is supposed to be, it's scary because it's random. And I can't remember, was it the Mason cult in California where they surprised those folks and I think, just killed them, but there wasn't really a connection. So I think that's what this movie was playing on, the fact that again, going back to Halloween, in suburbia where you're supposed to be safe, someone with a bag over their face could come in with a gun and kill you if you leave your window open or your door open and you have this false sense of security. But again, someone could come and do that. But I think that's why it never connected to me. The fact that it was a gun, it just didn't feel like Michael Myers or Voorhees. As ridiculous as some of those movies were, it wasn't in the same spectrum for me.
Andrew, what do you got on this?
So I haven't watched it. I actually just recently watched the movie. I haven't seen it before. My first pass through was, this past week. And it's interesting. It's an interesting look back to see how horror movies were established there. Like, it's one of the first horror movies I remember that actually has a narration to it. So that kind of surprised me, kind of in that documentary aspect. It was basically retelling the story. Then the killer, the scenes of killing, Bernie, like you were saying, with the gun, I think there's one or two that are a little bit more manual. I think there's one where he tapes a knife to a trombone and then plays the trombone to stab his victim.
While she's tied to a tree. So
Yes.
she's being stabbed in her back while he's literally playing the trombone, which seems completely, it seems ridiculous, but you're right. I forgot that was one of the more definitely ridiculous, but not a gun kill.
Mm-hmm. And there's a few elements of comedy that they add into the movie that for comparing it to more modern day movies, it would be distracting, but it's interesting, just kind of seeing this entire thing play out and just how much movies have grown since then. And they're starting to get, everything's so well kind of engineered now for everyone, the directors and writers, they know the mechanics, they know the tropes, they know the formulas to start throwing in. And it feels like this one was more of an exploratory focus towards kind of slasher horror films.
It's not a great film. We talked about it, the giant spider invasion, and this one has another Gilligan's Island alum in Marianne. So she's in that, and I want to say Ben Johnson is the sheriff, and I remember him from, if I remember this right, from Sam Peckinpah's The Wild Bunch. So you had these older actors that were getting this work in these movies, and I think those were the parts that's probably what the movie posters were, to get people to realize, oh, look, it's Marianne, and I can see her get killed. I don't know if that's the tagline for the movie, but it's definitely a case where I'd agree, Andrew, this is interesting in the sense that the narration brings in those documentary elements, but outside of that, there's not much more to this one. It's interesting. I guess, if it's connected somehow to some murders that happened in Arkansas, then I would imagine if we were in Arkansas, it would probably be more of a terrible urban legend because people would remember that. But outside of Arkansas, again, assuming that any of this is even remotely true, I would imagine more people obviously know Michael Myers than they do the Phantom.
Yeah, I think it was based on some series of events. How closely, I'm sure not very closely, but I think the whole Texarkana feel like that. I think it's Charles P. Pierce was the director, the guy that did Boggy Creek, which I think also takes place in the same area. So I think he was from there, and I think he was kind of taking a look at a very, narrow slice of America with that. And Boggy Creek scared the shit out of me when I was a kid. Not so much now, but I think it was what benefited it when you're younger was the really kind of guerrilla documentary style filmmaking that, when you're a bit older, you would just consider poor filmmaking. But it works when you're 9 years old because it looks like it could be actually real and happening. And then just my only other thing to add, talking about the cast, and for those that are watching along and not just listening on the podcast, Andrew Prine is in this movie, and Andrew Prine is also in the series that is behind Doug's shoulder, V. So there's a little tie in there.
Very nice. All right. So he
was one of the visitors. I'm trying to remember what his name was, but he was one of the baddies. He's the one that gets the red dust dumped on his face.
Oh, Doug, don't try to walk away from V so quickly.
I would never try to walk away from
a
V.
modicum of respect for the visitors, if you don't mind, sir.
Love V. All right, but we are heading to the bayou. We're going to get ourselves some crawfish as we head on down to Louisiana. And hey, it's a movie I might actually be able to talk about. We're heading to Louisiana, and Interview with a Vampire has fallen on the map. Now, the reason I'm a fan of it is, again, because I look at this is one of those crossover movies. I honestly, I never looked at it as a horror film. It's got vampires, yeah, there's blood, blah, blah, blah. But I never looked at it as a horror film. I looked at it as a fantasy film, a drama, even a romance, because of the love stories, not just the uncomfortable love story, but the family relationship. So Tom Cruise, Brad Pitt, Kirsten Dunst, Antonio Banderas, Stephen Ray, Christian Slater. I mean, a great, great, great cast. And I think everybody, I think it hit its time. It was I would say it's a pure 90s movie, where you've got all your top actors at the time hitting everything right. Really the introduction of Kirsten Dunst. She did a couple of little things before then, but then this was it, with this little girl who stole every scene she was in. She acted way above her age, whether it's the way that it was written or just her chops. And you've seen that obviously in her movies down the road. But I was just a fan. I think, again, we've gone back and forth whether the movies fit the state or not. And I have to say, absolutely, even though this movie travels to Europe, definitely identifiable with Louisiana, the Bayou, New Orleans. It really does hit hard, and you see the evolution of that area throughout this movie. So I think this is something that definitely fits on the roadmap and fits squarely in Louisiana, because it's such a big part of the movie itself. And I think Brad Pitt, as this young plantation owner, I think he identifies it really, really well. I think he sells it really well. I'm not going to give you my diatribe when it comes to Tom Cruise and his acting chops, but Antonio Banderas and Stephen Ray, I think Stephen Ray, this was probably my first introduction to him, and his deadpan demonic attitude, the way that he was just so matter of fact, old school vampire. If you don't do it this way, nothing else matters. We're taking you out. He was probably, besides Kirsten, the most impactful character in the entire movie. I just loved his delivery. He was just, I think it was a perfect role for him. So yeah, I'm a huge fan of this, but like I said, I never looked at it as a horror film. And the big actors didn't really lend itself to being a horror film or a slasher film, which is what I thought all horror films were, until you guys have continued to educate me. Bernie, what are your thoughts on Interview with a Vampire?
I don't have too many, because this movie came out when I was in high school, and I do remember the Anne Rice craze. And I know it's maybe a terrible connection to make for I'm sure there's two camps. There's the Anne Rice camp and the Stephanie Meyer camp. And having worked at Barnes and Noble during the Twilight years, I was very much on the front lines of the Twilight camp. So I saw the fans and what that was. So in high school, when the Anne Rice craze was happening and everyone was reading the books, and then the movie came out, I wasn't a fan then. I didn't see this movie till much later in my life. And at that point, I didn't have that touch point with Anne Rice or any of the books for it to make any impression outside of, like you mentioned, Doug, the production value was very high. And I thought there were a lot of name actors for a movie that is a genre movie. And to be fair, it's kind of interesting because this is also the first movie that features vampires that we've talked about on the map. So that's the one thing that kind of caught my attention, is that I don't know that there are obviously some great vampire movies, and a lot of them are, just classics. But the fact that this one didn't come up till now, and for me, didn't leave that much of an impression. And this is definitely more like you mentioned, Doug, a crossover movie that was more. I don't know when it came out, but it was definitely made to bring in the masses, to bring in book readers, but just people who were going to the box office, to the movies in the 90s to watch a movie that had all these big actors in it.
Yeah, this was 94. This was, Brad Pitt, Tom Cruise at the height of their popularity, or Brad on his meteoric rise. Tom was, as established as it could get in 94. But yeah, I mean, you had Christian Slater, who was kind of on the downslope, but still a big name. And then again, Antonio Banderas. This was right around, I'm struggling when Desperado, From Dusk Till Dawn, I think those were right after this, when he got into that world. But this was something, again, that kind of took him to that next level. Andrew, what are your thoughts? Because this, you probably didn't see this in the theaters, I'm assuming.
I did not. I think I saw it on HBO my first time, and I've seen it a long time ago. It wasn't too far out of theaters by the time I got to it. And it's a good movie. I enjoy the movie. I think New Orleans is a great location, especially for this movie. Like, it's really, I can't think of really any other place in the United States that you can play, characters that span multiple generations and have a location that kind of fits it. It's such a cool location for it. But Doug, I think you're right. Like, for me, it doesn't really hit the horror kind of chord as much as I think I've established my bar for this map. Well, I mean, there's definitely elements in there, and I think if you were to pull the vampire out of it, I would probably move it more towards drama.
All right, Pete, what do you think? Does it fit? Does this fit in the horror genre?
No, I think you're spot on, Doug. I mean, I never viewed this as a horror movie. And again, the only reason why it falls into that is the vampire element. But I consider this as a very much like a gothic, capital R romantic movie, more than anything else. I mean, yeah, there's obviously some, horrific moments to it, but I loved it when it came out. I think this is a movie that I place firmly in the don't know that I want to necessarily revisit again, because I'm afraid it's going to not live up to my original viewing. And I'm not sure if it's going to age well enough. And, and I kind of like leaving it in that 1994 capsule of like, I got a little bit into the Anne Rice craze, like you were mentioning, Bernie, after this came out. I read the book, I read Vampire Lestat. I found like the whole idea of him kind of just like burying himself in the soil for, decades, just there and existing, and then getting to the point where he needed to come out and see like, how the world had changed. I found that, I think that's one thing about vampires that has kind of captured a lot of people's imaginations, is just like, how do you deal with that kind of immortality? Like how would a human mind like kind of grasp that whole going generation to generation and keep going, and how do you stay motivated to keep on sticking your fangs into someone else's neck? Does it get boring after a while?
So I was going to say, it's kind of real quick. I was saying it's kind of interesting because while that part was interesting, probably through the Anne Rice books, right? The flashbacks and how they can talk about how they've aged. That's what was interesting to me about the Highlander series, and how they were able to talk about past lives and past losses and things that they've experienced. So I think there's some through lines there, because that's what I was discovering in high school. And now little did I know that, to be like, a lot of it was the same. It's just one happened to be vampires and the other one happened to be, Scottish immortals that are arguably aliens from another dimension that come to Earth that fight to be only one, but only in the Renegade version, directed by Rennie Harlan in Highlander 2, The Quickening. But at the same time, same idea.
Yeah, and
that's a great connection, Bernie. Yeah.
The funny thing is, you mentioned the books, Vampire Lestat, all those other movies that we've been talking about, and all the sequels that they have spawned. I think that's probably, and you got to think about it, it might be their biggest regret, is they didn't capitalize it. I think this, more than anything, coming out with the Vampire Lestat would have been just phenomenal to have a sequel or a prequel, as it were, and they just never did it. I would love it if they went that direction, but they never went there, whether it was Tom Cruise or whatever, or just they couldn't pull the trigger.
And it's interesting. I mean, I don't remember much of that book, but it is such a very different story than Interview with a Vampire, because it mostly takes place, like you said, it's a prequel, so it mostly takes place and way farther back. And to Andrew's point, I mean, the whole New Orleans location, I mean, the city itself is essentially its own character in that movie. I mean, it's such a gorgeous looking film. I think it would be hard, and they did do Queen of the Damned like years and years later, which I think was pretty much a bomb at the box office.
Although it did have Aaliyah, who
it did.
So all right, so great movie, but it's funny, the three of you all kind of gave me the same energy when we talked about it, and my energy was higher. So that alone tells me that collectively the three of you 100% do not consider this a horror movie, because it didn't get you as jazzed as everything else we've been talking about. But I think as we travel, this next one might put you guys back in the mood to talk about horror. We're heading west. We're going to the big state. We're going to the boot. We're going to Texas and the massacre, the one and only. Andrew, we're going to start with you. The Texas Chainsaw Massacre.
Yeah, so this one was very easy to find on the map. For horror movies that are really just synonymous with the genre, as well as being able to find it on a map, Texas Chainsaw Massacre is really just perfect. I remember seeing this movie. I can't remember how I saw it. I know it was in theaters, but my first watch through of this movie ended up taking a lot of time before my second watch through. It's, really just like a visceral horror movie. It unleashes a lot of stuff. I like to think that it's, in the same vein as like The Hills Have Eyes and Wrong Turn, where you have kind of the protagonists are kind of fish out of water, being hunted by people or peoples that have superior knowledge of the area that they're in, and they're able to use that to their advantage to really terrorize them. But just definitely the depths of psychoticness that they have for Leatherface and the family, and the horror that gets unleashed. It's really just it's paramount among those in a similar space. Really, for southern or for kind of like the western southern horror, this one stands out, I think, head and shoulders above the rest.
Pete?
I'm going to be a slight contrarian. I never loved this movie. I think it's got a lot of elements, but I maybe it was my expectations again. This was a rental with my cousin and my brother, and its reputation certainly preceded itself at that time. This is like one of those don't know what we're about to get into, but it was talked about in hushed tones like amongst the older kids. I'm like, I don't know, should we even be watching this? This is like when you would pass by Faces of Death in the video store, like I'm not sure we're allowed to rent this movie. So when we actually saw it, there's a lot to like about it. Again, I love that low budget Tobe Hooper feel. There's a lot to recommend it. Again, kind of interesting. It not on the same level as Halloween, but when people think about this movie, they think just like nonstop gore. And yes, there's some gore in it, but a lot more is left to the imagination than what is actually seen on screen, which I think is effective. But there was like whatever that was needed to kind of push it over the peak to get this to like Mount Rushmore of like all-time classic horror films. For me personally, it didn't quite make it over the hump.
So you wouldn't put this is not a tentpole horror movie for you? For
me, no. It is in terms of its influence and how many other people view it. I actually found the sequel like a little bit more interesting. There's it's a bizarre, the Texas Chainsaw Massacre 2 with Dennis Hopper, which was made in the mid 80s. Is completely bonkers gonzo, and but totally totally watchable. There's just a lot of interesting things going on where like they're at the radio station, and again, another powerful female character that's kind of traumatized, but then, you know, gets it, you know, to herself to like, well, I gotta take matters into my own hand. So that one, I actually kind of like that one more. And again, that's not saying that that's a good movie either, but it's there's something about it that there's an energy to it, and there's just, like I said, there's a gonzo-ness to it that is totally watchable.
I mean, Bernie, Toby Hopper, he's one of those, you know, horror godfathers when you talk about directors. Everything from Texas Chainsaw Massacre, Eaten Alive, Salem's Lot, Poltergeist, one of my absolute favorite horror films. He keeps going. This is his world. Is this a tentpole movie for you when it comes to horror?
I think I'm actually a little closer to Pete's perspective on this movie. And just to throw Return to the Living Dead some love, Toby Hooper was one of the first directors approached to direct that movie. So just need to throw that out there. A lot of these horror movies I did not see growing up because I was not allowed to see this. And certainly Texas Chainsaw Massacre, I don't know that there is a TV edit that would have survived. But I think to Pete's point, that's also why I avoided it when I went to college and had the ability to watch it, because I didn't know about I Spit on Your Grave, and I didn't know how unforgiving and gritty grindhouse that movie was. But I knew the reputation of Texas Chainsaw Massacre. So it wasn't until a few years ago that I actually saw this at a drive-in with Creepshow and a few other movies of that era. And I think Pete's point is right. Like, there is a lot less gore in this movie than you think it would have. And a lot of it doesn't come until the end of the movie. So I think there's something interesting about the movie in that Toby Hooper must have been tuning into the Manson outsiders, outcast type vibe that was out there. The movies that we've talked about, like in Wrong Turn and Deliverance, where, you know, the folks are going out into the middle of nowhere to be confronted by these backwoods families that now, you know, like take advantage of them because they're in their own neck of the woods. So there's something about Texas Chainsaw Massacre that I'm supposed to love. Like, it should be on the shelf. But I think, like Pete, it actually kind of fell flat on me because the movie itself, it was interesting to watch. The direction, like the actual directing of it, was cool. Leatherface is interesting, but I've seen the other movies, and I think it actually is more interesting when it's at its most absurd, when it goes into that Rocky Horror Picture Show kind of craziness that when you start getting into is certainly number 2, but isn't one of them like Texas Chainsaw Generations with McConaughey, where they start getting into like some really weird, I don't know, some really strange situations. And because of, I don't know if that lends itself to this concept of this weird family. I mean, it's all the stuff that I think Rob Zombie perfected for me, like House of a Thousand Corpses, Devil's Rejects. If Toby Hooper is certainly, you know, in the DNA and the foundation of Rob Zombie, I think I would rather see Rob Zombie than rewatch Texas Chainsaw.
All right. I gotta say, I'm kind of shocked at the reactions. I mean, in my head, again, not the horror guy, but when I think of horror, this is a first thing that pops into mind. So I was expecting you guys to be all fangirl. Ooh, this is the greatest thing ever, blah, blah, blah. But okay, I guess there's a difference of opinion when it comes to Texas Chainsaw Massacre. Yeah, it's had a lot of iterations, a lot of sequels. Again, it's got that great, the director Toby Hopper, he's got that great history. Again, some of my favorites with Poltergeist.
I would love to build off the Rob Zombie piece, because yeah, absolutely, like the family depicted in Texas Chainsaw Massacre were more caricatures than like Rob Zombie had, where, you know, these felt like just some other world villains, or like in Hills Have Eyes, like a very human villain, that, you know, for some reason it made it more, I don't know, real. I think for me, like, I saw Texas Chainsaw Massacre pretty early in my horror movie experience. And I think maybe approaching it a little bit earlier has made me think of it in a brighter light. Because like I saw that before I saw The Hills Have Eyes, before I saw any of Rob Zombie's films. So that's definitely some soul searching you guys are putting upon me.
Is this one the original? Is this something you would have seen with your dad?
Yeah, absolutely. It's one of the movies that he showed me that has resulted in a psychiatrist bills.
Because he helped your dad. We talked about this earlier. He helped form your moviedom, your fandom when it comes to this genre, as well as just your love of movies. So I had just assumed that this had to be one of the top ones that he was going to show you.
Oh yeah,
I would be curious to know, what later generations think of a movie like that. Because it's, in some ways, it's very much of its time. Like, there's this element of these pockets of America that are almost like undiscovered and, off the beaten path. And does that exist anymore? I mean, I think that keeps coming up from time to time, because we're so interconnected now. Like there's something like, can you stumble upon something like that where, like in the 70s, I think it was much more, people were out camping and they were getting out, back to nature type thing. And so you could be driving somewhere in the middle of nowhere and stumble upon this crazy kooky family of cannibals. And it like I said, I would be curious to know what some generations, some younger generations would think of that now.
And you could see like they're having a hard time telling the same story in modern times. Like, they've remade Texas Chainsaw Massacre and had some sequels with that. Like that, in a time where cell phones exist, and they have to go out of their way to really explain why they're isolated, because, rationally you would know that, you can get help at any time. And, it's interesting to see some movies, either they change the environment to force people back to an age of disconnectedness, or they throw in some sort of kind of one-liner to at least explain why they kind of stuck with the more traditional style.
We could maybe come up with an infographic of like modern movie, how they explain away like lack of cell phone service and to further the plot, because I think that could be something interesting. Yeah, because it always comes up, like you said, Andrew. It's like a one-liner. And just because, we got to get this out of the way, and people are like, oh, okay, yeah, they're in the mountains, no reception, I get it, or whatever the case might be.
Or the girlfriend threw the phone out the window, stuff like that.
Right.
All right, so that brings us through Texas, and we're going to head a little bit north to the Soonerland, and we're going to go to Oklahoma. Now, I'm going to take a wild guess that out of the three of you, only one of you may have seen this movie, Terror at Tenkiller. Andrew?
I tried to add this to the homework list. I can't find it.
That's a big hard no from me.
Bernie?
Crickets.
All right, good.
Nothing on this one.
I'm glad, because I did research. I did some homework. It's Oklahoma. So we've got to fill that, because I didn't think anybody was going to have anything. Because that, by the way, Terror Tenkiller, 0 on Rotten Tomatoes. Yeah, an absolute goose egg. So I came up with another movie from Oklahoma. This is a surprise for everybody. So I'm assuming that some of you guys have this, and I'm pretty sure you do. We're going to go with Splinter, 2008 horror. We'll start with Andrew. Andrew, Splinter, is this something that you can wrap your head around?
No, I haven't heard of this one before.
Really? Man, did I strike out? Are we striking out on Oklahoma? So let's see. Plans.
Oh, Twister.
Oh, wow. I mean, we could do Footloose. No.
That was
terrifying in its own right.
It was terrifying in its own way. I was looking through Oklahoma. I mean, you got Twister, you got UHF, which, I mean, come on. You got The Green-Eyed Monster, a 1919 silent film. Ghostbusters Afterlife. So that's the new one.
Oh,
right. It hasn't come out yet, but I'm assuming that would hit the list.
Can we just do editing magic once it comes out next year?
Once it comes out, we'll go back and we'll just plug it in. So let's talk about Ghostbusters Afterlife. Oh yeah, no. So I think we're going to drive right on through the Sooner State, and we're going to head on up to Kansas.
Doug, before we get to Kansas, I'm just curious, in your research on Terror at Tenkiller, what is Tenkiller? I feel like there's a word or two missing from that title.
I know. So you're right.
Doug, I was going to say, Doug, before you do this, we should do a bit of since none of us have seen this, and Doug, you might be the only one who's actually aware of what this movie is about. Like New Daughter, which has opened up so many worlds for us, we should go around the horn here. Pete, Andrew, like we should try to come up with like a 30-second version of what we think Terror at Tenkiller should be. Pete, go for it.
Oh, sure. I get to go first. Maybe. All right. I'm trying to Terror at Tenkiller. Right? So Tenkiller is a place, or is it Tent Killer?
No, 10, Tenkiller. Can I give you what I'll give you? A Tenkiller is? It's a lake. So Lake Tenkiller.
Of course. So it's a lake that kills 10 people annually, and a group of 10 go up for a weekend getaway, relaxation, and spoiler alert. The lake gets them.
Andrew, what is Tenkiller? Tell me your story of Tenkiller.
Well, obviously, it's a Cthulhu play. They're summoning the ancient ender of the world at the lake.
Yeah, that's almost dead on, actually. Bernie?
I'm going to do The Price is Right and add the dollar and say that part one of Terror at Tenkiller is about some sort of weird cult that sacrifices 10 people to a lake every year. And it probably has to go back to like frontiering times where these folks believed that in sacrificing, like their crops could grow. In part two, well, maybe at the end of part one, at the end credits, we see the tentacle come out. But then we discover in part two, which is a bit of a flashback, we go back to frontier times and we see that the cult was actually banished from England and they're a Lovecraftian cult. And that's where Andrew's version comes in. And that's where they actually set up the fact that 10 people have to be sacrificed so their crops wouldn't die. And then we find out in part three, when inevitably Elon Musk builds a space launch pad there, and then they take this curse to space. So it becomes Terror at Tenkiller in orbit.
I'm not even going to read the actual description because I love those even more.
And at the end, they drain the lake, and there's a society of small,
ants. Are they ants?
Yeah, let's swing it back east. Yeah, keep that a recurring theme.
Netflix, if you're interested in the screenplay, please write to Fan2Fan Podcast, care of Bernie Gonzalez, P.O. Box.
Don't throw me under the bus, Andrew. You will also get co-producer credit along with the rest of us. If we're all going to have something on our resume, it will be this. And
honestly, the reason I wasn't going to read the breakdown of it, the synopsis, is because it's one line on Rotten Tomatoes.
You got to do it, Doug. You got to do it.
2 girlfriends try to relax at Lake Tenkiller, but a slasher won't let them.
Oh my God. So mean. So mean to that slasher.
I feel like the terror could be, but their previous breakup won't let them. Their uncharged cell phone won't let them. Their continued annoying calls from work to handle that upcoming project won't let them. Like, it could be Mad Libs with anything. They just happen to throw in a slasher.
And I'm not getting the sense that like the slasher won't let them relax doesn't necessarily mean that he's there to kill them. Like I see him kind of like sharpening his knives by like they're trying to sleep at night and they're like, hey buddy, we came to Tenkiller to relax. We're trying to relax. And he's out there like, nope, not gonna let you.
Although Pete, what if we took the other angle? What if this description is a little biased and maybe they interrupted the slasher's relaxation? He's there minding his own business. He's making a living, selling his wares at the side of the road, maybe sharpening a few knives at the local flea market. And then these 2 city girls come in and they just start littering and causing a muck and getting drunk and capsizing boats. And he's like, guys, what are you doing? I just want a little peace and quiet. I used to live in corporate America. I was a day trader, and I've moved out here to sharpen knives and connect with the woods. And what are you guys doing? You're not letting me relax. Maybe we should consider his perspective.
I like it. Yeah, this guy, he's probably, he's killing people in Tulsa. He just, every year he has that week to himself where he just wants to come out to the lake just to get away from it all, to kind of get his mind wrapped around, the next wave of killing that he's going to do when he gets back to the city. So he's just there. He wants to be just present with himself. And these two women come in and they just, they fuck it all up.
So, April Fool's twist. No, Doug. April Fool's twist. In part 4, we find out it's actually her. It was the third friend of the duo that they actually abandoned back in college at a party. And then now it's all comeuppance. It took 4 movies and a trip into space and a Lovecraftian cult. But it all comes together.
Yeah, we always build out like a series so that's how we make money.
Absolutely. I think we're going to have to copyright this episode because I'm going to open up a can of worms here. Has there ever been a horror film told from the perspective of the slasher?
Terror at Tenkiller. 3.
Terror at Tenkiller. Besides this opus.
Actually, no. Pete, I got to correct you. I think it's part 5. It's the found footage one where the killer actually has the camera on him and he's documenting everything because he has Instagram channel and he's trying to get more followers.
Yeah.
All right.
Yeah. Just let me know when we get to 6. That's the one I want to write when we go to space. That's, for me, that's my specialty is slashers in space. But I think that would be an interesting take of almost like a, not necessarily a prequel, but a kind of like a Lion King 1.5, where it's a side along where it's like the sidecar of the main movie, but you're seeing the same movie. So imagine you're seeing Halloween or you're seeing, Friday the 13th from their perspective. And they're doing, self-narration. You're hearing their innermost thoughts. And it's this whole other outer body experience where we're hearing what Jason is thinking about, what Freddy really fears. And this is how he got there.
Yes, it's interesting you say that, Doug, because I believe Stephen King came out recently and said that he was interested in, like, he would either write or direct a Friday the 13th film from Jason's perspective. Like, he was like very interested in that. He's like, I want to explore what this guy's thinking. Like, they basically, like, he's left to drown in a lake, but then he doesn't die, and so he's like kind of living in the woods on his own. He's like, that's an interesting story to me. Like, let's explore that. So
I think by the fourth movie, it's just yakety sax playing inside of his brain. For Louisiana, Angel Heart, I thought was a good, like, New Orleans one. Robert De Niro and who was the other one? Who's the other guy? I don't remember who the other guy is. And then 10 Cloverfield Lane.
Oh yeah.
So I haven't seen that one. It's on my my favorites to watch, and I feel like I should probably watch that.
Oh yeah,
that one's great.
That was good.
I think it's the standout one of the Cloverfields.
Halloween 3, Season of the Witch was Louisiana.
It was
California.
I was going to say, I think it took place in California. There, yeah, they drove down from San Diego, or drove up from San Diego, I think it was.
You got Hatchet 2 and Hatchet 3. What happened to the original movies? Hatchet?
The Hatchet movies, interesting.
Yeah, you got The Reaping.
A lot of cutting, a lot of farm.
It feels like the subtitle to Terror Tenkiller 2, The Reaping, because that feels very, I don't know, just sort of Western Oregon Trail era, where, Children of the Corn type stuff.
I think it
Reaping
was like some sort
the
of
Reaping.
That must be it. Or the siding, the culling, maybe that's the one.
Yeah, the Reaping was this kind of like supernatural. There's this girl that can, like, bring the plagues.
Oh, is that the girl with the face gear or something, and they're preventing her from talking?
It's been a while.
Or no, I think that's something else. Yeah.
All right, if you want another Louisiana one, you got The Zombie Farm.
Acres and acres of zombies. Come on down.
Yeah, we got your zombies here. We got your crawlers. We got your spitters. We got your biters here at the Zombie Farm. Come on down. Bring the kids. They'll love to run across our maze.
We have a zombie petting zoo.
All right, well, that wraps up another portion of this road trip We're in the RV going across the United States of horror movie here at Fan2Fan Podcast. We just ended with, I think I can honestly say, all of our favorites, Terror at Tenkiller in Oklahoma. But make sure you come on back and continue this road trip with us. For Bernie, Pete, and Andrew, I'm Doug. We are Fan2Fan Podcast, and we'll see you next time.